She had already lost everything once: her dream, her love, her belief in people. But life has a way of writing its own story, one we never could have planned. Let's find out what happened to Sophie next. There are things that cannot be broken, no matter how hard someone tries. Green space design turned out to be nothing like she had expected. She had expected a large, cold office where people in suits talked about budgets and deadlines. Instead, she found a space that someone had clearly designed with love. A bright, open room with living plants along the windows, material samples spread across the tables, walls covered with drawings and photographs of completed projects. She stopped in front of one photograph. A large urban park, a pathway where the trees met overhead, forming a green tunnel. "That's our project from 5 years ago," said someone behind her. "Thousands of people walk there every day now." She turned around. The firm's director, a compact man in his 50s with attentive eyes, extended his hand. "Mr. Harrison, I'm glad you came, Miss Hart. We've heard about your work in Eastvale." He nodded toward the photograph. "People who know how to think about space the way you do are rare." She didn't immediately find the words to respond, but she understood one thing. Here, she could grow. The first year, she worked harder than she ever had. She absorbed everything: new scales, new materials, new approaches. She learned to think not about a single garden, but about an entire living space. Not about one flower bed, but about how a person feels walking through a park, what they see, what they hear, what they feel beneath their feet. Her projects were noticed. Colleagues stopped at her desk and studied her sketches. Mr. Harrison sometimes came over and nodded in silence, and from him, that was the highest praise. In time, she was given larger projects, then larger still. But somewhere inside, quietly and persistently, lived that fear. She knew it was there. She had learned to live with it. When someone came too close, in work or in life, she felt something in her automatically take a step back. She didn't allow anyone to come too close. Until the day Thomas arrived. He joined the firm as an architect and immediately filled the space around him. Not with noise. He wasn't loud, with presence. That particular presence that belongs to people who know exactly who they are and why they are here. He walked into a room and the room somehow shifted, became sharper, tall, dark-haired, with the expression of someone who was used to making decisions and not regretting them. He spoke sparingly, but when he did, everyone listened. Not because they had to, because they wanted to. At the first joint meeting, he sat across from her and listened to her presentation, and she suddenly lost her place, not because she had forgotten anything, but because he was looking at her in a way, directly, attentively, without a single unnecessary thought on his face, that for a moment she forgot where she was and what she was saying. She collected herself, continued. But something had already happened, a small shift she couldn't name. After the meeting, he came over to her. "That idea with the water mirror at the center of the park," he said without preamble. "It's brilliant. I want to understand how you see it structurally." She looked at him. "You're an architect. You know yourself how it's resolved structurally. I know, he agreed, but I want to know how you see it. They talked for another hour, standing by the window with drawings between them. He listened the way very few people know how to listen, completely, without the feeling that he was already composing his reply while she was still speaking. She walked home that evening thinking, who is this person? They began working together, first on smaller projects. He designed buildings and the space between them. She filled that space with living things. It was a conversation, not a task, and its execution, but a real conversation between two people thinking in the same direction, from different sides. Thomas never said, do it this way. He said, what if we try this? And then waited, listened, sometimes agreed, sometimes pushed back, but always honestly, without hidden meaning. One evening they stayed late. Everyone else had long gone. Only their light was still on in the office. She looked up from the drawings and saw that he was looking at her. What? She asked. Nothing, he said. Just thinking. About what? He was quiet for a moment. About how you see things others don't see. A pause. That's a rare thing, Sophie. She didn't know what to say. She turned back to the drawings, but she felt something warm and slightly dangerous stir somewhere deep inside her. She didn't want this. She tried not to notice. She told herself, he's a colleague. It's work. It's just a passing feeling. But Thomas didn't let her forget about him. Not pushily, not dramatically. He was simply there, simply came, simply looked at her in that way, as though he knew something about her that she didn't yet know about herself. One evening he stopped her after a meeting. I want to ask you something, he said. Ask. Are you having dinner alone tonight? She looked at him. Thomas. Just dinner, he said calmly. I'm not asking you to marry me. Just dinner. She almost said no. The words were ready. Polite, correct, safe. But something stopped her. All right, she said. They had dinner at a small restaurant nearby. They talked about work, then about cities, then about where they were from. He had grown up in a large city, but spoke about it without nostalgia, calmly, the way you speak about a place that belongs to the past. And you? He asked. A small town, she answered. Eastvale. You won't have heard of it. Tell me about it. And she did, about the valley between the hills, about Mrs. Parker's garden center, about how she had stood on the porch looking at bare trees and slowly put herself back together, piece by piece. She hadn't planned to say so much, but he was listening, and the words came on their own. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. You're a strong person, he said at last. I just survived, she replied. That is strength, he said simply. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, she looked at a man without that automatic protective step backward. She simply looked. She saw tiredness behind the confidence, warmth behind the decisiveness, and something else, something that looked like realness. They walked back on foot. The evening was warm, the city quiet. At the entrance to her building, he stopped. "Thank you for the evening," he said. "You were the one who invited me," she pointed out. "I know." He smiled, and in that smile was something that made her heart take a strange step. "That's why I'm saying thank you." He left without looking back. She stood and watched him go, and told herself she needed to be careful, that she knew how this went, that she needed to keep her distance. But the next morning, when he walked into the office and gave her that direct look of his, the distance somehow closed on its own. What grew between them grew the way everything real grows, without announcements and without permission. Simply one day she understood that she thought about him constantly, that she listened for his footsteps in the hallway, that when he walked into a room, something in her changed, and that this frightened her. One evening he took her hand, just like that, in the middle of a conversation, and she didn't pull away. He looked at her. "You're afraid," he said quietly. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Of me?" "No." She paused. "Of myself, of what might happen again if I'm not him," Thomas interrupted, not sharply, but firmly. "I understand you can't simply switch that off, but I want you to know I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not asking you to trust me all at once. I'm only asking you to be here, right now, with this." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't step back. The tender request arrived on a Tuesday morning. The development company Maple Grove was planning to build a cottage community. Not just a residential complex, but a real community. Several hundred homes, a lake, a large park, spaces for children and for the elderly, places to gather and places to be alone. They were inviting several leading landscape firms to submit their concepts. The winner would receive the full contract for implementation. Mr. Harrison gathered the team that same day. "This is the largest tender we have ever received," he said. "I want us to win it." He looked around the room and stopped at Sophie. "Miss Hart, this is your project." A pause. Everyone looked at her. She felt something tighten in her chest. "Mr. Harrison, Thomas." The director interrupted and looked at Thomas. "Do you agree?" Thomas was looking at Sophie, not at the director. "More than agree, he said. "There is no one better for this project." He didn't take his eyes off her. No one. She wanted to say she wasn't ready, that this was too much responsibility, that she was afraid of letting the firm down. But Thomas was looking at her, steadily with that quiet certainty of his. And she understood that if she said no, she would be betraying not just herself. "All right," she said. "I'll do it." The concept came to her at night, the way the best ideas always do. She lay in the dark thinking about Eastvale, about what it had been for her. Not just a place, but a living thing that had taken her in when she was broken. About how a small town knows its people, knows what they need in the morning and in the evening, in spring and in winter, when they are lonely and when they want to be together. That's what this community needed to be, alive, a place that knows its people. She got up at 3 in the morning and picked up a pencil. The main pathway, wide with benches under trees, with lamps that cast soft light. Not formal, alive. A place where you can walk slowly, where there is somewhere to sit, along it. Panicle hydrangeas that bloom from summer through late autumn and hold their clusters even in winter. Dry, cream, and blush, like old lace. A lake at the center. With natural banks where reeds and willows grow, and where you can walk right to the water's edge. Not a decorative lake with concrete borders, a real one, alive, where you might spot a frog and hear ducks. A space for children, but not the usual playground with metal slides. A living labyrinth of bushes where they can hide. Trees with branches low enough to climb. A path that winds between trees and leads to a small bridge over a stream. Corners for the elderly, sheltered from the wind, with benches that warm in the sun, with flowers that have fragrance. Not set apart from everything, woven into the whole space. So a grandmother on a bench can watch her grandchild running between the bushes. Places to be alone. Small green alcoves, corners behind hedges, a bench by the water hidden behind a willow, and everywhere, space for animals, bird feeders built into fences, low borders so a hedgehog can pass through, patches of uncut grass where insects live. She knew this from Eastvale, that a community without animals is just a set, but a community where birds and butterflies and hedgehogs live. That is a home. Thomas looked at her sketches in the morning and was quiet for a long time. "You grew up in a small town," he said at last. "Yes. And you know what people there actually need." "I do." He looked at her. "We're going to win this tender." They worked together for months. She and Thomas and 2 junior designers. Sketches, specifications, detailed plans for every zone. Thomas designed the buildings so they entered her space organically, not dominating, but dissolving into the greenery. They argued sometimes, but these were the arguments of 2 people who want the same thing and are searching for the best path. They built the model together, large, detailed, with miniature trees and tiny benches and real water in the lake. Thomas took it home the day before the tender to add the final details. "Tomorrow at 8 by the entrance," he said. At 8. She agreed. She walked home thinking, "I am ready." For the first time in a long time, she felt ready. This was her project, from the first idea to the last detail. She knew it by heart. She could speak about it for hours. And beside her was a person who believed in her. She arrived at 7:30. She stood by the entrance to the building where the tender was being held, with her folders, with her drawings, with a heart beating steadily and calmly. The morning was sunny and cool, the kind of morning that feels important. At 8, Thomas wasn't there. She looked at her watch. 8:05. She glanced around. Other participants were already going inside. 8:10. She walked to the payphone on the corner, dialed his home number. Long rings, no answer. 8:15. She called the office. The secretary said she hadn't seen him today. She came back to the entrance and stood there and felt something cold and familiar begin to rise. That same cold, that same fear, a competition again, and again something was going wrong. She tried to stop the thought, told herself, this isn't that. Thomas isn't Adam. But the cold kept rising, and with it that old, deep voice. Nothing is going to work out for me again. I'm going to fail again. Competitions and we are cursed. The receptionist looked at her. Miss Hart, you're up in 10 minutes. She breathed in. No model, no Thomas. There was only her, and an idea she had carried for months. A space she knew by heart. A community she could see so clearly. It was as though she were already standing in it. She stepped forward. The presentation room was large and slightly cold. A long table, 5 members of the panel, windows looking out over the city. She laid out the drawings. Where the model should have stood, there was nothing. One of the panel members looked at the empty space. And the model? It's been delayed, she answered evenly. But I'm going to show you something else. I'm going to show you how this place will feel. And she began to speak, not about technical specifications. Those were in the drawings. She spoke about the people who would live there, about a grandmother sitting on a bench watching her grandchild, about a child who finds a hedgehog under a bush and runs home to tell her parents, about 2 people in love walking along the lake in the evening when the water reflects the lamps, about an elderly man who steps outside in the morning and hears birds. She spoke about the hydrangeas along the main pathway, how they change color through the seasons, how they hold their clusters even in winter, about how a community needs to remember its people, to know what they need in the morning and in the evening, in heat and in rain. That good landscape design is not decoration. It is care, expressed in the language of trees and water and flowers, and paths that lead exactly where they need to go. The panel listened in silence. When she finished, the head of the panel, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a very straight back, removed her glasses and looked at her. "Tell me," she said, "did you yourself grow up in a small town?" "Yes," Sophie answered. "It shows," the woman said quietly, "in every word." She came out into the corridor and stopped. Thomas was standing by the wall, with the model in his hands. Disheveled, jacket open, tie knocked to one side. He was breathing the way someone breathes after running a long way. He saw her, and something in his face changed immediately. "You've already presented." "I have." He set the model down on the floor, came toward her, closer than usual. "What happened?" she asked, and only then she saw it. His jacket was dusty. There was a scratch on his hand. "An accident on the road," he said. "Minor. I'm all right, but the car wouldn't go. I stopped everyone who passed. Finally, someone gave me a lift. There was no phone anywhere." He looked at her. "I ran from the stop. I'm sorry." She looked at him, at his crooked tie and the scratch on his hand, and the way he was looking at her right now, with worry and with something else that mattered more than worry. And that cold fear, which had been rising in her all morning, suddenly released, simply let go, because this was not that at all. "It's all right," she said quietly. "You're not angry?" "No." "How did it go?" He didn't take his eyes off her. "I don't know yet." She paused, but I said everything I wanted to say. He exhaled, and then, without warning, without words, he stepped forward and put his arms around her, simply held her, firmly, warmly, the way you hold someone when you have wanted to for a very long time. She went still for a moment, and then let go, leaned into him, felt his warmth and the smell of his jacket and the way his heart was beating, a little faster than it should. "I was so afraid," he said quietly above her. "Not that you would lose, that you would think I did think it," she said honestly. "For a moment." He pulled back slightly and looked at her, close, directly into her eyes. And then I walked in and presented," she said, "on my own." He looked at her, and in his eyes was what she already knew, and what made her feel warm and slightly afraid at the same time. He raised his hand and very carefully moved the hair from her face. "You are extraordinary," he said simply. She didn't look away, and he kissed her, quietly but without asking. The way you kiss when you have known for a long time that this will happen and have simply been waiting for the right moment. She responded, and felt something last and protective in her finally dissolve. Somewhere at the end of the corridor, someone walked past. They didn't notice. They waited for the results in the lobby, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. His hand rested on hers, simply, naturally, the way a hand rests when it has the right to be there. She looked out the window at the city and thought, "Whatever happens, I did everything I could." And for the first time, that thought didn't frighten her. Then someone nearby quietly said her name. She turned. Adam was standing a few steps away, slightly to the side, uncertain, older, slightly stooped. He was looking at her with the expression of someone who had been meaning to say something for a long time and had finally decided. Thomas beside her tensed slightly. She touched his hand, quietly, gently. "Adam," she said evenly. "Hello, Sophie." He paused. "You look well." She said nothing. She waited. He looked down at his notebook, then back up. "I wanted to tell you." He started and stopped. "That competition. Back then, I submitted your project as mine, and I couldn't even defend it. The panel asked about the concept, about the ideas, about the soul of what had been drawn. I had nothing to say. Because it wasn't my soul, I could draw it, but I couldn't explain it. Because the explanation was yours." Silence. "I failed that competition, Sophie, with your project. I failed. Because without you, it was just paper." She looked at him. She waited for anger or for satisfaction or for something sharp. But all that came was that quiet feeling of something finally falling into its proper place. "I know," she said simply. He nodded, looked at her once more, and walked away. Back to other people's displays with other people's work. Thomas was quiet beside her. Then he asked softly, "Does it hurt?" She thought about it. "No," she answered honestly. "It just is." He held her hand more tightly. The panel secretary came out into the lobby with a sheet of paper. "Green Space Design, concept by Sophie Hart." Thomas turned to her, and she saw in his eyes what you rarely see. Not joy at winning, pride, real, warm, without anything mixed into it. "I knew," he said. "You couldn't have known. I could." He took her face in his hands, simply without hesitation. "I watched you when you talked about this project, about the grandmother on the bench and the hedgehog and the hydrangeas in winter." A pause. "People don't talk about work that way. That's how you talk about something you love." She looked at him, at this man who had left his car on the road and run across half the city and held her in the corridor and kept her hand while they waited. Who had believed in her when she still doubted herself? "Thomas," she said quietly. "Yes? Thank you for everything." He smiled and kissed her again. Not quietly this time. Slowly, warmly, the way you kiss when there is nothing left to prove and nowhere to hurry. Around them were people, voices, footsteps. They didn't notice. The following spring, the first hydrangeas were planted along the main pathway of the Maple Grove community. She stood there, in her work clothes, with a spade, with earth on her hands. Thomas stood beside her and was looking not at the bushes, but at her. The way you look at someone you cannot look at enough. "Will they take?" he asked. "They will," she answered. "How do you know?" She smiled and looked at him. "I can see it." He laughed, quietly, genuinely. He pulled her close, just like that, in the middle of a working day, among people walking all around them, and she didn't step back. She leaned in, felt him kiss her temple, softly, lightly. The first residents of the community were coming out to watch the planting. An old man with a walking stick, a young mother with a pram, two children who immediately ran off down the path. This community would be alive, and her life, too. Some wounds heal, some betrayals become beginnings, and some love arrives not like a storm, but like a garden that blooms slowly, petal by petal, until one morning you wake up and understand that it has been here all along, and that there is nowhere left to go. Did Sophie's story touch your heart? Tell us in the comments. Did something like this ever happen in your life? Have you ever had to start over from nothing? Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today.